of the creaking stool and the scar on the fingers. These are details that matter, details that convince the reader that this is a real person in a real place. Can I get something to drink? Zarak wiped off the sweat on his forehead. Nice detail there too. Well, I can try to arrange something for you. The old man's voice had a strange serenity in it. Now, whenever I read a phrase, strange serenity in it, I'm a bit bothered by that. I don't think I've come across old men with strange serenity. Even Mahatma Gandhi didn't have it. And it's a signal to me that I'm going to be looking at a guru type or some kind of a saintly figure or some kind of a symbolic image of a person who's not really real, but he has serenity. So be careful with these. Abstract words are very dangerous. So I would avoid it. Zarak looked at him attentively for the first time. Attentively is not quite right there, but it's okay. The old man looked well above 70. The first thing that Zarak noticed about him was that his back was still straight. He was quite tall, easily 6 feet, maybe a little more. Now, this is where I say, remember the Flannery O'Connor thing. The mother turns around and immediately sees the other girl, and that is part of her experience. Here, the writer is telling me he was 6 feet tall, etc., etc. It's information that is stopping the action. People like Hemingway do this as well, by the way. I mean, you're not unique in this. And I don't think he's that great a writer, by the way, either, but that's something else. He had snow-white long hair that was glowing in the yellow light of the bulb hanging from the low ceiling of the small hall. He had long white beard that outlined his oval face perfectly. I'm not quite sure whether the long white beard outlined, the outline is not quite the right word, but that is, I'm being picky there, and I have to be picky. There were hardly any wrinkles on his radiant face apart from some laugh lines, etc. Now there's too much information here that is making me feel uncomfortable as a reader. When I see, after having read the serenity of his, the strange serenity of his voice, that he has this long white beard and that all the description there is emphasizing the idea of this otherworldly figure. And of course he is an otherworldly figure, I know that. But I don't want to be told that. And I don't want to see images that are simply a representation of the old cliche of the old saintly man who has his white hair. So you know that, man, I don't repeat it. As the story proceeds, we see other people in this place. There are 6 other men, and each one is there. And it turns out that what we're looking at is the image of purgatory. Each one is a sinner of some sort or the other. And you have, and there are 6 other men, and with the hero of the story, there's 7. And so you have 7 deadly sins, I take it. And each one has, the name is an anagram of his name, so that they are representations of himself. So you have there an elaborate idea, and the idea itself is quite interesting. But I get the impression that you write the story because of the idea and not the idea because of the story. And that leads to the feeling of complete disbelief in the reader. Even if you're going to be creating the story of the other world, you have to make it credible. And you're not the first person to write a story about the other world. There are so many mythological stories. And the more you read, the more you find out how that is done. And I would say it should all come as a surprise to the reader, rather than the reader suddenly knowing, oh yes, this is what is happening, and how clever this writer is. There you are distracting the reader with the creation, and it fails to work, and it simply won't do. So my suggestion to so-called sharpening the quill is rewrite it, but not from the point of view, well, I will never prescribe a way to write. You should discover it yourself. But I would say, make it natural, create the imagery, and you don't have to tell the reader that you're using anagrams. And you don't have to even suggest the idea that we're looking at purgatory, and never use the word purgatory if that is what the thing is about. Is that if you're writing a story in which the action is taking place in purgatory, then let the reader have the experience of purgatory and not be told the word purgatory, okay?
I'd like to know where it was set. The name is obviously a Pakistani name or whatever. Geographically,
Yeah.
one feels somehow adrift. I mean, where is one? And that leaves a kind of, one is quizzical about this, and it leaves you uneasy.
Yeah.
And
So what would you suggest?
what I suggested, the details should be more specific. I mean, purgatory is not a concept. If he's
Oh, yeah.
Pakistani, purgatory is not a concept that we are familiar with. So he's
Yeah.
mixing in, he's referring to two cultural or, you know,
Yeah.
there is
Yeah,
something there which
it
is...
should be done in a way, I mean, it is
Yes.
universal thing anyway.
Well, it is, but if you read Celestial Omnibus, where E.M. Foster brings in all this sort of otherworldliness, but it makes sense, it's cohesive, it's, you
Quite
know,
true, yes.
you see.
He does use the word Rajasthani. I don't know whether that is, would that help?
That's
Is it Rajasthan? Is somewhere yeah. So I don't know whether that confuses it.
I see.
So-
Just to tie in with what you just said, I mean, distracts the reader.
yeah.
You know, reading Jhampa Lahiri's interpreter of melodies, I came across, you know, she was like trying to show off her control of English, which was distracting. You know, she basically said, had. All right, we understand that you know how to use had. What I was saying is, you know, just to tie in with the very idea of do not do things that distract the reader, you know, just the very thing about the language, that language should really, I mean, we should not really pay attention to the language, but to what is really going on. And Jhampa Lahiri is an interpreter of melodies, basically uses the, and I was like really, you know, intimidated by the very fact that she's using had. I mean, just to make us understand how, you know, strong her background is with the language.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't work. I mean, that is distracting. I'm just to really
Yes, true.
get off on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it should always feel natural. Yet, of course, I mean, again, one cannot generalize. But if there's some writers where the language is the story itself, and yeah, I know that, not in Lahiri. Anyway, Amar, do you want to say anything? Yeah. No. Maybe we can talk a little later.
Yes.
Yes, somebody else wanted a question. You better take a mic.
Thank you for your very...
Oh.
Hello?
Oh,
Yes. Can I say something?
sure.
Okay. In your speech, you mentioned Chekhov's 6 points
Yes.
for writing short prose.
Yeah.
And I hope these are not rules set in stone, because looking at them, they seem to be contradicting each other. At one point, it says that objectivity throughout should be maintained.
Yes.
At the same time, it says that one should be audacious and be original and be reckless.
Yes.
Again, as a writer, if I am to write something as I see it, and with my own experiences, and to paraphrase yourself, with my own bias, then how can I remain objective? Isn't objectivity to rise above one's biases?
You can never rise above your biases, because that is the way you see reality.
Then how can I be objective?
Objective as far as the lens that you're using is going to show the world from that point of view. If you use a wide-angle lens, everything's going to come wide angle. And if that is your prejudice, that's the way you're seeing it, but it's still the image of that reality is going to be there.
So as far as possible.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Listen, there is nothing absolute in this. everything is a point of view. And the only rule that one follows is that there are no rules. It's total freedom. This is the whole enjoyment of being an artist, that you are the creator of reality. I want to give you a few more quotations from these dead writers. There's one, a lovely one I came across from Borges. He says, I begin with the glimpse of a form, a kind of remote island which will eventually be a story or a poem. I see the end and I see the beginning, but not what is in between. That is gradually revealed to me when the stars or chance are propitious. I try to interfere as little as possible in the evolution of the work. I do not want it to be distorted by my opinions, which are the most trivial things about us. How about that? It's great, isn't it? I glimpse a form, he says. And then it's like this island in the distance, and I want to go there and get it and make it part of me. I see the end and the beginning, and somehow I have to write the middle. And I'm reminded also another quotation that I've often used. Early 20th century French poet Paul Valéry talking about his friend Mallarmé, and Mallarmé had a friend, Degas, the great artist who did this ballerinas. And Degas also used to write poems, and one day Degas said to Mallarmé, oh Degas, Stéphane Mallarmé, I had a great idea for a poem, but I'm struggling and I can't write it.
Excuse me?
And Mallarmé said to Degas, my dear Degas, you don't write poems with ideas, you write poems with words. So that's very important. All right, folks. Let me give you a couple of other things. And one is Muhammad Sahib Sheikh here. Nahi hai, kahan gaya? I just wanted to...
Excuse me?
This is another story that was given to me, and I was going to give a little critique of it.
I have a question.
Sorry.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
When reading the previous extract, you said that we should go straight into the action
Yes.
and not include our stream of thought. But for some writers, including the stream of thought actually involves the reader.
Give me an example.
For many writers, including the stream of thought, giving their opinions in their story is really effective. It involves the reader.
My dear lady, I've never read many writers. I've only read individual writers. Give me a name of an individual writer. Give me an example.
Like Jane Eyre, the narrator actually includes a stream of thought a lot. And that is very effective because it involves the reader into the story.
If it works, it is fine. That is the only answer I can give you. There are no rules. Either works or it does not work, either it's good or it's bad. And your decision is going to be based upon what else you've read. At any given moment, our appreciation of things depends upon what we've experienced until then. All right, yeah.
Sir, there are a couple of things I couldn't understand. One was you said that he looked at it attentively, and you said that the word attentively is not appropriate, so I couldn't understand why.
He looked attentive.
What exactly he looked at, that I couldn't write. I'm sorry, I've forgotten,
I
but
do not
it
know
was
the grammar of
something.
It did not sound correct to my ear.
Sir, but I just wanted to know as to why, what is wrong with it?
It's a good question, it's a good point. Correct, yeah. Yeah.
So that may be the idea that maybe you meant intently.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No, but why attentively doesn't sound correct? What is wrong?
Maybe I'm wrong, that maybe it is correct. I thought it should be, you look with attention or with greater care or...
I'm not getting it.
I think what I was looking for is a perception, so that I could see the character looking, rather than told attentively, to be shown the way in which I would understand the idea of attentively. But I think you're probably correct, that I was completely wrong.
No, I didn't try to say that. Please don't take me wrong. There's one more thing I couldn't understand. You said that there should be idea because of the story, not the story because of idea. I couldn't understand that either.
That was badly expressed. I realized what I was saying it. But the quotation from Borges makes it quite clear, I think, that the idea emerges from the language that you create. Of course, sometimes you start with an idea, but often you start because some image rather than some thought attracts you and you want to create it. Let me give you a couple of other things here. This is Muhammad Zahib Sheikh's story called The Life Before My Eyes. And it starts with, it all happened in a moment. Sometimes one moment can last for so long. End of the first paragraph. Now, never, this is not a rule, but don't start a story with it. It is an old cliche. Mary entered the room, looked at John lying on the sofa and said, "Oh my God, it has happened." Well, we've heard it thousands of times. It happened in a moment. And then to add, sometimes one moment can last for so long, overdoes it, and again is off-putting. Then he says, first there was the feeling, period. It is another cliche. A deep, sinking sensation of a bending loss, period. Something was wrong, period. Something was terribly wrong. At first, I could not get my head around it, but then it struck me. I wasn't where I was supposed to be, neither in my head nor in person. There, in the middle of the road, on the dark wintry night, accompanied by nothing but a wind that seemed to cut right through the skin and flesh to prick the bone. But I had been too occupied with my thoughts, too occupied to sense the jagged wind and where it was and that I was headed. No, that won't do, and it's enough to want to stop and go and take a walk and hope the rain will pause for a moment while etc. Again, generalized statements and cliches, you have to know your literature. There's no shortcut. The only way to learn to write is read other writing. And then the overuse of the word it, at first I could not get my head around it, but then it struck me. It like that is quite unbearable. Then came the sound, a loud, reverberating honk, the kind of hoot most suited to signal the end of things, period. All things, period. Its incessancy seemed to pervade into the wind and somehow give it an intent most vile. Intent most vile sounds Shakespearean, sounds all right. Shivers began to root themselves in my body. Root is good there. Clinging onto it for sustenance. The harrowing sound rocked my world, the world that began to tremble as if it was a dollhouse, and I no more than a tiny dummy inside. The image of the dummy is quite good. But it's a very cliched style. Short phrases, full stop, and then the repetition. That kind of thing one has seen so often in so-called creative writing that it has become unbearable. So I will not do that at all. What I found when I read some of these stories is that basically people are over-impressed with the fact that they're writing stories and they're remembering that which they have read of the more successful types of ordinary writers, and it's not very good. Let me conclude by giving you a few quotations from this book that I have here. Gee, don't call me doctor, I'm not a doctor, but a retired professor.
I just wanted you, before you could go on, just say something about showing and telling in the story.
Yeah.
Showing versus telling.
Okay, let me this is exactly what I'm looking at. Well, some of you are not here, and I was passing time, and this is my new book, and I have the chapter called A Short Guide to Writing Fiction, and I begin by talking about Hitchcock's films and how they absorb you, even when you know the story does not matter, you are absorbed because of the presentation. I remember seeing a documentary of Hitchcock's many years ago, in which he says, My films have nothing horrific in them, no horror in them at all. It's all in your mind. And you think about it, and he says, what I do is I start off with a scene in which something is happening, and it puts you on the edge of the seat. It terrifies you. Just because it's raining outside and the windscreen wiper's doing this, and some music in the background, you think this is terror. It's nothing. It's an ordinary event. And you know that you've come to see a Hitchcock film, so you anticipate that everything is going to be full of horror. But if you think about it, there's nothing there. And you know that scene Psycho of the curtain and the bath that she's having, the scream. Now, one has heard about it, one has seen it 10,000 times, and still it grabs you. So it's nothing but it's all action. The same applies to writing fiction, especially, first of all, the importance of continuous action. As long as there is action, something happening that we can follow with our senses, we remain engaged and absorbed. As soon as the writer stops the action and makes a statement, our interest diminishes. An image presented vividly replicates reality more precisely than any statement that merely conveys information to the reader. Especially in a short story, the presentation of continuous action with its suggestion that the action is taking place in real time as if the event were filmed will make a more compelling narrative than one in which the action is interrupted by some explanatory remark by the writer. I've been saying this again and again already. And then I would advise you to look at some very good examples. My best example I can give you is chapter 2 of Madame Bovary by Flaubert, in which Charles Bovary, for the first time, sees Emma. Read it. If you have not read it, read it. And if you read it 10 times more. It's what Chekhov shows you, not Chekhov, Flaubert. When he comes and knocks on the door opens, he sees this girl in front of him. He does not see the girl. He sees the dress that she is wearing, a merino dress. And it takes 2 or 3 pages before he sees her eyes. And there's a wonderful little scene in which because the reason why Charles has come there is because he's a doctor, and her father needs, her father's broken his arm or leg or something, and he needs bandages. And so Emma makes a bandage, and she's sewing something. As she's sewing, she pricks her finger, and as she pricks her finger, she does this, puts it to her lips like that. And Flaubert, this is before cinema, shows you the cinematic action. And as she does that, Charles looks at her, because the action draws his eyes, and he looks at it, and he sees her lips. And then she does something else, and he sees her eyes. It takes several pages. Maybe Charles is very dumb and slow, but it takes some pages before he sees her. But that is the way we are. Okay, now, if you look at that, and follow that way of doing things, you'll be fine. Now, to say this, I have to repeat this. While the traditional story is going to be the one in which there is this continuous action, that is the best model for it, you are not obliged to do anything else. I have come across stories, and there's some minds which will only write in the abstraction. Or some of Borges' stories, for example, they are philosophical tracts, in fact, some of them. It all depends on how well it is done. Now, when I was teaching at University of Texas, I would invite the students to experiment. I say, all right, we've done our classical traditional stories. Let us see what we can do. We're living in the 20th century, it was then. And things have changed. We are not living in Chekhov's time. What can we do now? And they were very responsive. One day, I was going to my class, and one of the female students was standing outside, and Texas is hot like here, and she was wearing a sort of a coat. And she said, do you mind if I show my story to the class? I said, no, not at all, you're welcome. And so she came in, and she took her coat off. She was wearing very short shorts, so that her legs were bare, her arms were bare, and she was wearing a white halter top, a very stiff white, and there were words written all over her body, from her neck down, and all over her legs, full of words. And she came to the class, she took all the stuff off, and she stood there like this. I am the story. It's written on my body. It was quite stunning, you know. Apart from the fact that she was a nice girl, but that is something else. No. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that. Peter Greenaway film, I saw afterwards, and that was, Peter Greenaway was many years later, in which, oh yes, it's a terrific film. If you, what was it called now? It takes place in Hong Kong, Japan. Yeah. Okay. So, but it was very good. Another girl did another story where she came and she sat in front of the class with a box in front of her, and she was sitting like where I'm sitting, and she got 3 other people to sit in front of her there, and in her box she had hundreds of words on pieces of paper, and she put her hand in, take a word out, and give it like this, and they were invited to read the word aloud. So you had a succession of words. Now folks, what is a story? Succession of words. Sometimes they make sense, and sometimes they don't. And here, when the words were read aloud, and as soon as the word, let us say, glass, immediately, if there are 50 people here, there are 50 ideas of glass in your minds. And that idea will depend upon your experience, obviously. As whether you read, whether you respond to that one word, or whether you respond to the entire play Hamlet. It's the ideas in your mind, and each one is going to be different depending on your experience. And occasionally, a succession of words will lead to a sentence, short sentence, but they would. And that was exciting too. That maybe when we heard the other words, we were not paying enough attention, so we missed the sentence. But now we get the sentence. It's quite something. And I can give you several other examples. There's one that has stayed with me for 30 years now. A man gave me a story. He never said a word. He said, "Sir, here it is." No, they never said, "Sir." Here it is. And it said 32 and 1/3 pages to anarchy. Nice title, I thought. I turned the page, and it said, the English dictionary. Why are you laughing? It said, the English dictionary, A, letter A. And then what he'd done was he had torn the first